Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
Well, being coachable is one thing, but then there is also the thing about a leader stepping into the shoes of a coach, and that can be a challenge as well. So Ashira, how do you coach someone through failure without stepping in and taking over?
Biggest and easiest way to do that is to make sure that you're always asking questions. So the main role of a coach is not a teacher, but it is that you are helping someone find the solution on their own, acting as their guide. So you don't want to come out and just tell someone what you think they did wrong. You want to help them understand. So asking as many questions, and it can feel tedious, especially for someone who has never been a coach or has really not received much coaching. It can feel like a very slow process because you think you already have the answer, and maybe you do, but you telling someone, here's how you failed or here's why you failed, isn't teaching them a lesson. It's just giving them an answer, and they're going to be less receptive of that. If you can help them understand how or why that failure occurred, they're going to be that much more invested. They're going to also have to do a lot more of that self-searching. If you're asking them questions, and you don't want to start with anything big, you want to start small. So you're not going to sit there and say, so, hey, what went wrong? Because that's not coaching. And that's something that, it's an innocent question on its own, but then you get the employees just kind of throws their hand up to go, I don't know. So you can't start big. You have to start small and say, or even just something, tell me about your process.
Welcome back to another episode of your favorite podcast we're trying to figure out. I'm your host, Saul, and today we're diving into one of the most talked about but often misunderstood skills in leadership, delegation. And we're doing it with not one, but two incredible experts. Joining me is Ashira Prossack, a workplace communication expert who coaches leaders on generational dynamics and culture, and Sean Glaze, a leadership speaker and coach known for building sticky, high-performing team cultures. Welcome, Ashira. Welcome, Sean.
Absolutely a pleasure to be here, Saul, and looking forward to learning from not just you, but Ashira as well.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. It's going to be jam-packed. And to all of our viewers who are tuning in from LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to drop in your questions in the comments. And as always, if you're looking for CP credits, check out our podcast series on mycpe.com/podcast or download our MyCPE One mobile app, which is available on Android and iOS. Now, let's jump in. Delegation sounds simple. Just give someone a task, right? But we all know it's not just that. There's much more than that. So Ashira, I'll start with you. Why do so many leaders, especially high achievers, struggle to delegate?
I think it really boils down to a simple thing of not being able to communicate well, because there's a very fine line between delegation and micromanaging. And often where that line is drawn is in the way that you communicate that ask, the way that you either phrase the question or say, hey, you're doing something, or hey, can you do something? So that's one of the easiest ways that I like to distinguish between delegation and micromanagement.
Wow. Sean, anything to add there?
Yeah, well, again, I know that this is not a long enough program to go into all of the details. And when I'm coaching a leader, obviously micromanagement and the idea of delegating and just getting clarity about what their role is first. I think that so many leaders achieve a position of leadership because they were such strong individual contributors. And when they move up into that role of manager, they're no longer delivering on results for a specific project. They're delivering results through people. And I think that that's the major shift that you have to make mentally before you go into talking about the steps of delegation.
True. And in fact, I resonate to everything that both of you are saying. In fact, I've seen leaders that confuse control with accountability. They just don't want to let go because they don't want to let go of the outcome. I mean, I speak out of personal experience. When I rose into the ranks, got into the leadership role, I was really good at what I do. And eventually you reach that point and you have people who can now do a lot of your work. But then I have an expectation that I personally have set for how that work needs to be done, and to expect the one who is coming into the team to do the same way is difficult, especially if I'm not communicating it right, like Ashira pointed out, right? And yes, it did lead to micromanagement. I won't deny it. Initially when it started off, that was there. It's just that fear of letting go. You don't want the outcome to be disturbed just because now somebody else is doing it. But that happened. That happened. And this is something that I want to, which is why we're talking about this, because both of you have come with a lot of experience, right? So Sean, from your experience of working with teams, what's the ripple effect of poor delegation on team morale and coachability?
Well, yeah, it goes directly to Ashira's point of the micromanagement. I think that when you frame the conversation around what delegation truly is, it's not necessarily just getting something off your plate. It's finding somebody who you're actually going to be able to help to grow and develop their skills because they've already demonstrated a capacity or a responsibility or an accountability for successfully completing others. And I think, again, I know we originally talked about kind of the task delegation template that I make available on my website. For the kind of 4 parts are based upon the acronym TIME, because certainly it does give you more time, but it's the time that you need to focus on. We can go into those 4 points, but I think that the main thing that you mentioned is the most important, which is how the leader or how the owner of an organization sees that. And you're not letting go of the outcome. You want to be very clear about the desired outcome. You're letting go of the process after you've been very clear in communicating, as Ashira said, on the front end, what those expectations are and what the equipment is you're going to provide and how you're going to evaluate at the end.
True. You have both been into this point where, a lot of leaders struggle with this. You try to coach them into this, and you would have seen some signs. Like, what are some early signs that a leader is doing instead of leading?
Ashira, thoughts?
Well, again, I mean, it can all be really harken back to communication. And one of those things is, do the actions match the words? So is that leader always saying, all right, I want to look for ways, like Sean, you mentioned, to grow and develop people, or are they just looking for ways to pawn off work? So, are they saying, all right, here, employee A, I'm giving you this task because 1, I think you're capable. 2, this can help you if you're looking to, perhaps they're looking to move into management. So maybe this is something that would help them grow their leadership skills. So they explain that to that person. And then besides explaining what the work is, why and how it should be done. That's a great way to communicate it versus that leader that may just be, hey, employee A, here's some stuff to do, and you should do it because I'm the boss. So, while that is never said explicitly, often a lack of communication and transparency in that is exactly what's being said. So that's why I always look to see if the words are matching the actions.
Yeah, I think that is so fantastically well put, Ashira. The idea of, are you taking the time to clarify on the front end the value that that person is bringing and the value that the opportunity will bring to them in developing themselves so that they understand the why behind the what. And I think oftentimes leaders will treat delegation more like a wedding bouquet instead of a track baton. And I think a wedding bouquet, you kind of throw it and hope somebody grabs it, and then you're mad if they don't, etc. Versus a track baton, you find somebody who's already running on the same track in the same direction and has developed that, capacity or competence in something that you want, and you hand it to them intentionally, understanding where they're supposed to end up.
Right. I mean, like you talk about communication, and I guess that's where it is. Let's take it as an example. If you can share an example about a difference between telling someone what to do and to delegate it effectively.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
I guess I can start with that one.
Yes.
And I mean, the telling is really that kind of lack of direction, lack of clarity, just saying, here, do it. And that's often what we'll see, whether it's meant to be that or not. I work with a lot of leaders who really are not aware that they're basically just saying, do the task without really taking the time to explain what, or even sometimes explain how to do it. A lot of times that it's just saying, okay, here, or maybe they'll say why. Maybe say, here, it's you're part of a team. This is going to be your role in getting this project completed, but they're lacking that how. So I think that's really a big one, is that, again, the telling is just that. It's not asking questions. To properly delegate, you want to make it a conversation. You want to make sure that they understand. So explain the why, explain the what, explain the how, but then also make sure that that employee understands it. So asking them questions, do you need any other help? Do you have the tools? Even just a simple, okay, can you, just give me a rundown of maybe the couple first steps you're going to take, just to check for that understanding, and making sure you're not just getting, yes, boss, I can do that, but making sure that, yes, boss, they truly can.
I like that. You mentioned the why, because I was going to come to that. It's not about the what, but it's also the why, because oftentimes, when somebody's delegated a task, you oftentimes feel that, did you even check with me? Like, why did they think I'm that competent? Because the person who is being delegated to may not even feel that confident about that responsibility that's been given. It could be just because it does not have the tools, or maybe it does not have the clarity that, how do I get this done? In fact, I faced that issue when I was an executive, and my boss would be like, okay, so this, get it done, whatever. And I'm like, you feel good that, okay, your boss is asking you to get something done out of the ordinary, but then at the other end, you're like, how do I get this done? Because I'm not confident about this, because I really don't know why he saw that skill in me to even get that to me. And that creates a lot of anxiety and stress, and eventually, whatever you deliver, even if you were to give it your best, you're scared of the outcome, because you're not sure what was the perception of the outcome, and you're just trying to deliver your best from whatever you understood.
Yeah, that's not a good recipe.
That's not a good recipe. But that happens, and it's a very natural, it's something that happens day in, day out. It's something that people are not coached on. It's something, because this is something that we had spoken in the earlier podcast as well, that oftentimes in organizations, leadership does not come because of the skill set that you've demonstrated, but you become a leader purely because you've been in the organization for so long. So they're like, all right, so now you're gonna head, without really focusing on coaching that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think obviously the issue is leaders give poor direction because they've not been directed themselves, and that's one of the reasons they'll be listening to this episode of your podcast, is hopefully they're wanting to pick up some of those skills and understand how they can be more effective in their role. And I think that ultimately our skill is everything. And this is where I went from kind of doing team building events, my background being in basketball and building cultures there, to then turning to business and helping them build cultures with organizations and teams. Ultimately, the culture or the team building or the teamwork and all the other things that a leader is responsible for, those are ultimately a symptom of the quality of that leader. And the reason that leaders want to be able to delegate isn't just, as Ashira said, to get something off of their plate, but it's to continue to grow the people around them, because I truly do believe that the best parents, the best coaches, the best leaders work very hard to build systems and to build team members so that they ultimately make themselves less necessary. And I think that part of delegation is building up the skill set of the people around you and just making them that much more aware of the why behind the what, and making sure that they feel honored and excited at the opportunity to grow themselves, instead of feeling overwhelmed by one more thing on my shoulders that I don't have an understanding of why it's being dumped on me.
I hate that feeling. I still hate that feeling, despite the fact that I'm now in that leadership position. When you work for a business, you're never at the very top. All right. There's always somebody above you. There's a Japanese proverb: if you want to sit and do nothing, you have to be at the very top. Right. But okay. But you have been doing this for a long time. And so do you have any go-to framework or a checklist for like clear delegation? Sean, I'll start with you on this.
Yeah, well, I would actually, maybe take a little bit of an issue with one of the things that Ashira shared earlier, because I absolutely believe that clarifying the why behind the what, and when it's necessary, and what needs to be done and why those are all important. The one thing that I think it's really important to leave a good bit of leeway for your team members to figure out is the how, because how I do something isn't necessarily always going to be the best way, and you might have a better idea of what that path might be to get to the ultimate kind of result that I'm trying to explain to you. And the framework that I use when I'm coaching leaders to help them be better as delegators is, again, that kind of time template. And it starts with T, and that is, you've got to make sure that you target what is that important task, because it's important that you not give somebody something that is high risk that they may end up fumbling, because that's going to reflect on you. So as a leader, how do you choose the task that is not something that needs to be deleted, and not something that can be delayed, and not something that you specifically need to do, but something that you can delegate and give people time and opportunity to successfully complete it? After you've identified the task, then it's about identifying the individual who needs that skill, or who actually can benefit from the opportunity of growing because of that project. And people will tell you who they are by what they've done up to that point. And so you want to be very careful to give something to somebody who's not done very much well, because that obviously is sometimes going to be an issue. So you identify who's the person that's already on the track running. That's who you hand the baton to. I think that the third step is the one where a lot of leaders end up having difficulty, and that is in that one-on-one meeting, when you're going through and explaining what needs to be done and why you've chosen this individual. Then you need to mandate, here are the metrics, here are the standards. This is what bad would look like. This is what good would look like. This is what excellent would look like. And here's what I need by this date. We need this completed by this date at this standard. And that's what I'm going to allow you to run with. And I don't necessarily want to give them the how. As a basketball coach, sometimes you would teach, this is how we're going to do this. But sometimes if we're, say we're defending the post, I would tell you need to make sure you be in the low side, or you need to make sure that you're fronting. But the situation is going to dictate how they get there. And I think that in business, very similarly, people may come up with a way that is more effective and efficient for them, or more creative than you might imagine from what you've done in the past, and the how becomes something that they surprise you with pleasantly. But if you mandate the metrics of when it needs to be due and what it needs to maybe look like in order for it to be successful or excellent, and you kind of define success, you give them that opportunity to own it and to actually have some autonomy. And the last part of that framework that I'll use is you need to equip them and evaluate along the way. Because I don't think that micromanaging is setting up and saying, hey, let's check back in a week and see where you're at if I can help you. I think micromanaging is every single day checking in and sharing what you would do differently or taking it off their hands because you're not happy with that moment. So I think that, yes, absolutely asking, what do you need from me in order to make this happen? What is the equipment? What are the resources you might need? And hey, let's check back in blank to make sure that we're on the same page and everything's moving forward. I think that's a very valuable conversation to delegate effectively.
True. When you're saying this, I am certain that, obviously the leaders are going to chime into this podcast. There are also going to be employees who are going to be chiming into this podcast. And a lot of them would be like, this is exactly what I want my boss to know. Yeah. So if you are an employee who is facing these issues that, Sean just pointed out, this is if whatever Sean said is something that resonates with what you face, probably it's time for you to, give this podcast to your manager. Like when he's in a good mood of listening, like, hey, you should probably check this out. I really liked it.
And even if the leader, if they're not going to take time to listen to your podcast or to subscribe and to learn from all the knowledge that you've amassed as the content that you put together, Saul, I do believe that whether it's a link in the show notes, they can certainly take advantage of that template that's available on my website that I'll certainly make available to your audience. Because ultimately, it's not about me saying, hey, here's what you need to do, because that's going to turn a leader off. That's going to make somebody a little bit less pleasant to work with. But you can proactively ask questions. Hey, let me make sure, because I want to do a great job, let me make sure I get blank information. Excuse me. Oh. But I think asking questions and making sure that if I am tasked with something that I have questions about, well, when do you need this? Well, what does bad look like? What does great look like? What is a piece of equipment you can give me? Excuse me. Oh,
Bless you.
thank you.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Well, timely, very timely. Anyways, so Ashira, I want to ask this because this is a very interesting topic for me as well. Psychological safety, because that's something that comes into play when you actually delegate something to people. So, what role does psychological safety play in helping people own their responsibilities?
It's a huge one. And you brought up that perfect example of kind of feeling that, well, wait, maybe I'm not the right person for this. Maybe I don't have the right skill set. Wait, why did you pick me? Those are very common thoughts that everyone experiences. Maybe not every time, but certainly a lot. So answering those questions provides them with that psychological safety that's giving them the reason why. But the other step is to show them that you're there to support them too. So not only do you show that you believe in them by saying, here's why I chose you, but saying, I will be available. So again, making sure that your actions meet what you're saying is schedule those check-ins that can be used at any time. And I very much agree with Sean. Like, it's not like we're going to meet every 48 hours, that's too prescriptive, but just say, hey, I'm available. If you have a question, reach out. If you're in the office, just literally have the open door policy. If you're working remote, just send me a Slack message. Keep that line of communication open. That means that they know that you're supporting them throughout any of it. They'll be less likely to try to push through when they hit a roadblock if they know that you've already extended that invitation to truly want to help them. And then, of course, you do have to make sure that you're available. If they reach out to you, make sure that you are supportive of them. Don't just say, oh, never mind, I'll take it back from you. Make sure that you give them those tools, because that has happened. It's like, okay, no, I see it's too much for you. Let me take it back. That removes that safety net, and that becomes actually a big roadblock for future delegation, because then all the voices that were in that employee's head that, oh no, I wasn't the right person, oh, I'm not good enough. It's really important that when they're asking for help, you give them help, not just taking something back. And I think too, the third part is to follow up after. A lot of times that part is missed. So they give you the final product, great, thanks. But then there's never anything of, do you review it? Give them some feedback on it if that's appropriate, or let them know, hey, wow, this really helped. Here was your role. You fulfilled that because you gave us this. It helped team Y and team Z. So then they go into the next one going, oh, wait, I really did make a difference, feeling good about themselves. And that all leads into that psychological safety as well as just boosts confidence overall. And not just in delegation, but I feel that basically in their job as well.
These are atomic habits, okay? It's tiny habits that if every leader were to practice, like, Sean, your time network, Ashira, you brought up a very critical point, giving them that feedback of whatever they delivered, how that helped. These are very small habits, but they could have such a huge impact. I mean, for all those leaders who are doing it, great, kudos to you. And for those who are not, they need to make note of this because this is very critical. And, when you mentioned about, when somebody reaches out, don't just, as a leader, you shouldn't just say that reach out to me just for the heck of it. You gotta talk the talk, walk the talk, right? I mean, you gotta be there instead of really saying that, hey, you know what, if it's too much for you, that's okay. I'll give it to somebody else. Never want to do that.
I think that the worst phrase a leader can hear themselves saying, and this is something again you share when you're coaching somebody because they're guilty of it, and I know I was guilty of it as a young coach myself, is that's all right, I'll handle it. Because the stuff that I handle isn't making you better. And if I'm trying to do everything, A, I'm going to be overwhelmed. And B, I'm going to resent you for not doing the thing that I wanted you to do in the first place. But C, you're not getting any better. And you're sitting somewhere thinking, well, I'm kind of bored because I don't have the opportunity to grow or to learn and to develop myself. And so then that's when your people begin looking elsewhere. And so I think that absolutely the idea of a leader recognizing that delegation is important, not just in terms of lessening their overwhelm, but in terms of building morale and building trust and building competence and building confidence in their team so those team members feel that they are valuable contributors to something that matters.
True. And I want to shift this focus on a very critical thing, a thing that people often miss, because when you become a leader, you sometimes don't quite realize that, how do you know when a team member is ready for more responsibility? It's something which you have a team, great, you know what they're doing, and that's great. But then to be able to also have that skill to identify that there is a particular individual in the team who is ready to take in more responsibility. And that's something that you usually don't until there's somebody who's just stepping up and probably working late hours or something. And that's how you think, oh, maybe that's the person. But no, that's not it, right? I mean, that's not it. It could be because he's working late hours, because he's having a hard time getting things done, because you didn't communicate it well, and you did not give him the right tools. You did not equip him with the right tools. You did not communicate the whys well or hows well or whatever. But how do you know when a team member is ready for more responsibility?
Ashira, want to take this one?
Sure. I mean, two things. One, you have to be observant and take into account many, many factors. You don't want to just be looking at, say, the last time you gave them something to do. You want to look at body of work. So not just how they've handled previous tasks that you've delegated, but how are they working with the rest of their team? How is their overall performance? And then from there, you also want to make sure that you're talking to them about it and making it a conversation with them, saying that, hey, I think you're ready for more. I've identified you as a person who is ready for more, who can take on something, whether it's additional responsibility or a next level of something, and involve them in that, because that will help them start to, one, feel a little bit more confident, and two, feel that they have a say in it, because there will be those employees who are very happy just doing what they're doing and staying with their current roles and responsibilities. Not that they won't accept tasks to be delegated to, but this is kind of, again, tying back into that, making sure that you're giving someone a project that's going to help them grow. If you have an employee who's just saying, I don't want to be a leader, I am really happy, I love my job, I love what I'm doing, I want to do it for the next 5-10 years, then maybe they're not that right person to delegate something that is going to help build leadership skills. And that's where talking to those people on your team and figuring out what their goals are can help both you and them. I think it's really important that they're involved in it.
True. The point that you said that, to have an employee who would be like, I'm happy with where I am. I don't want to grow. I'm happy with what I'm doing. I mean,
But
that could be an altogether different podcast in itself, because there could be many underlying reasons for it, right? I mean, things that you just don't know.
I think if you'll allow me, Saul, and I love that difference, because I think that there is a huge separation between identifying a future leader and identifying somebody who you can continue to develop in their role through delegation, because the best players don't always make the best coaches. And you're going to identify who's a leader versus who is great in that specific role as an individual contributor. But those individual contributors in your organization, even when they love the role that they're in, we all desire development. And I think we all want to take on, the opportunity. And to answer your initial question, Saul, I always think back, and I'll tell, the leaders that I'll work with, when we're discussing the idea of delegation and who does that need to be and how do you identify. I think back to, when I was young, you didn't get dessert unless you cleared your plate. And little brother would play with the food on his plate, but he didn't necessarily clear the plate. And I wanted some dessert. And I think that sometimes, even if they want to stay in that role, you're going to have people who are consistently cleaning their plate and they're getting through stuff effectively and efficiently. And you do want it to be almost a reward. You don't want to pile something on somebody so they're going to feel overwhelmed and resentful of one more thing where I get punished for doing a good job. You want to make sure, as you said, Ashira, what is that reason? I chose you because I'm really excited to share with this. Is this something that you'd be interested in? And if you frame it in a way where it gives them an opportunity to pick up a new skill or to grow themselves, I think that ends up being something that they appreciate and look forward to and excel in far more than, again, the what without the why.
True. And now, Ashira, I'm going to turn the spotlight back onto you, because now I'm going to be asking you something that you're really passionate about. Because now we're going to be talking generational differences in communication styles, because that hugely impacts delegation, right? So how do things like generational differences or the communication styles influence delegation?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's one of the biggest factors, because everyone hears things the way they want to hear them. And this is one of the other really big roadblocks in successful delegation, is making sure that you are communicating with people in the way that resonates best. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to have a separate style for every single employee, but using generations as a general guideline to approach it definitely helps. I mean, some of the stereotypes are true. The Gen Z and millennial employees are going to be much more receptive in general to an email or a Slack message. There are a few that do like phone calls, but in general, if you pick up the phone and call them, they're going to be afraid. So again, using it as a framework. Now, on the flip side, the Gen X or baby boomer employees might be more receptive of that personal touch. So maybe you do a phone call, maybe you do a Zoom meeting, and that might help them just be that little bit more open. So again, I do caution that you take a look at your own team, because of course no one fits perfectly into stereotypes, but using those as a rule of thumb can help. It also can help ensure that things move smoothly once you've delegated, because again, if you want to do a check-in with an employee, they're more likely to be willing to do that and not feel like you're micromanaging them if it meets their preferred style of communication. So maybe it is just done over email. Maybe it is better with a face-to-face on Zoom or an in-person. So again, you make sure that you're using your best judgment, but a good place to start is look at the generation and figure out, do they want that more personal, which is that phone call, that Zoom, that face-to-face pop into their office? Or are they going to be more receptive of having a little bit more time to stop and think, getting a Slack message, getting an email? And I think that one of the things that I see the most with the differences between someone preferring that face-to-face or that, immediate, so the phone call or a Zoom versus an email or say a Slack, is that they just want a little bit more time to think about it. So I've noticed it with the younger employees, especially the ones that are Gen Z and are newer to the workforce. They're not as comfortable necessarily asking questions to their superiors yet, or they don't know what to ask. So giving them that little bit of time can help them feel more comfortable. Whereas a more experienced employee, and this is in a lot of times, regardless of generation, might just say, you know what, let's just do this. If you're asking me to do something, let's just do it so I can say yes and get it started. They'd rather not wait for that back and forth. So using that as a framework and then using your best judgment, I think, is the best way to use the generational differences as a tool rather than a hindrance. Because if you rely too much on them, you're going to end up getting a little bit into the weeds by not necessarily finding the right medium for that person. But if you start, especially if it's a person you've not worked with for delegation yet, that's a great framework to use.
True. Right. Delegation is one thing. It's a good thing. Every leader should delegate. It's, something that we should all do. But let's be honest, we have all had a moment where a delegation backfired, right? So how do you recover from that and rebuild trust?
How do
Sean.
how do you come back from when a project that you have delegated is not completed the way that you had assumed, right?
Yeah, it
Uh,
backfired. What you probably thought, okay, you should be Saul, you are the one because you are the one that I see, and you communicate with the house why Saul is also great. He's gonna get it done, everything is clear, but
I
it
am
just doesn't deliver.
a huge believer that everything that happens is absolutely the leader's responsibility.
Correct.
And it may not always be their fault, but absolutely, I'm going to take ownership and it's going to be my responsibility. And what could I have done better? And I think that one of the most powerful questions I share when I am coaching leaders that is their job to then apply to any number of different circumstances. What part of my leadership led to that result? What part of my leadership led to that result? And that's a pretty powerful question because regardless of whatever your title or role is, you can choose to be more accountable and more involved and more of an owner in terms of recognizing that we can all influence outcomes if we actually ask ourselves, what part of my leadership led to that? And more often than not, I believe that leaders end up seeing when they look in the mirror at themselves honestly, they see very clearly that, you know what, I didn't do a great job of choosing the right task. I gave them something that was far more mission critical, and that's on me for not identifying the right task. Or I chose somebody that I've already put too much on, and they ended up having it on this, back burner because they were doing other things and they just didn't have enough margin in their day in order to make sure that they accomplish what I know they're capable of, but I've asked them to do too much already. Or, you know what, I didn't do a great job of defining when it needed to be completed or what it needed to look like. And that lack of clarity goes right back to the leader. Or, you know what, I didn't give them the equipment or the training or the understanding or those evaluative meetings from the beginning to the end where I'll just wait, and then I'll check on you in 90 days. Well, if you wait 90 days, they're going to go off the rails a whole lot farther than you think. Whereas if I'm checking in every week or two, that ends up giving me a chance to course correct and to change the trajectory of whatever I see that might be improved, or to make sure that they feel that they're doing a great job and you can appreciate them for that.
Okay. Ashira, I wanna shift a little bit of a focus from delegation to coachability. Coachability, growth, and letting go. All right, that's what we're going to talk about. So let's explore the human side of the delegation, the coachability part, because I guess that's something that is very important as a leader. So, and Sean, I know uh, you're a huge advocate of coachability. So, how does being coachable make someone a better delegator or a delegatee?
I mean, coaching is obviously the answer to everything. No, in all seriousness, it's a lot of it is that when you're in a leadership position, you are so used to being the person that everyone goes to for answers or for help. So flipping that and working with a coach is going to put you back into a different perspective. It's going to get you into that mindset of learning and maybe putting yourself into other people's shoes. So, coachability is huge because it means that you're willing to look at a different perspective to improve yourself. And when leaders are willing to put in that work, it really opens up a lot of both room for growth from themselves as a leader, but I also see it as an opportunity for growth for their team because they can take those new skills and help share them. Say that, it one shows that the team that, oh, look, my manager is willing to put in the work too. So they're more willing to put in the work if they see that it's not just them that are expected to do the hard things or get coaching for themselves. Because I've seen this once where there was coaching offered to all the employees, and it was taken up by, I think, almost three-quarters of the team. And the leaders had the same thing, and only a couple of leaders within the team, I think it was a group of 14. Only two or three of them actually took that up. And it ended up just the employees stopped working with the coaches too because it felt to them it was a chore. It was more work. Well, if my manager isn't doing it, why should I? So I think that really helps set a good example and just kind of has this nice little trickle down effect.
I agree. Completely agree on that. And Sean, Ashir, also you mentioned about a mindset, right? Coachability is a mindset, right? So, what mindset shift can help leaders let go and empower their teams?
I think that is, and it leads to better delegation and being more effective in every area of your leadership when you are coachable as a leader. And I actually started, as you might imagine, as a basketball coach. My issue was with players who weren't doing things the right way. And so
Yeah,
you have talented people, and the same thing occurs in business where you got talented team members who aren't willing to adopt or to adapt to the new platform or the new process or the new whatever, and they end up sabotaging team performance because they're not coachable and willing to grow and learn and continue to improve. And I think that our team being coachable is absolutely going to almost always be a symptom of, are we as leaders first demonstrating that? And I think that what I discovered as a coach that now absolutely applies to leaders and organizations is your people aren't going to be coachable if you are commanding and consequencing. They're going to be defensive. If you want people to be more coachable, you need to be more curious and compassionate. And I think that curiosity and compassion leads to more of an awareness of maybe where a gap exists. And when you identify a gap between where you are and where you want to be, that makes you that much more open. So instead of being, annoyed by somebody offering an idea or advice that might help you, you're going to be that much more appreciative of and willing to apply that advice when you realize that that's something that can help you close the gap that is important to you. And whether that's in having better sales or, getting more wins, whatever that might mean for you and your team, coachability is ultimately about realizing that your job is to remain humble and hungry and not be arrogant. If confidence is thinking you can help, arrogance is thinking you don't need help. But humility is being willing to ask for and accept and apply that help. And I think that that's what being coachable is really about.
Well, being coachable is one thing, but then there is also the thing about a leader stepping into the shoes of a coach, and that can be a challenge as well. So, Ashira, like, how do you coach someone through failure without stepping in and taking over?
Biggest and easiest way to do that is to make sure that you're always asking questions. So
Mhm.
the main role of a coach is not a teacher, but it is that you are helping someone find the solution on their own, acting as their guide. So you don't want to come out and just tell someone what you think they did wrong. You want to help them understand. So asking as many questions, and it can feel tedious, especially for someone who has never been a coach or has really not received much coaching. It can feel like a very slow process because you think you already have the answer, and maybe you do, but you telling someone, here's how you failed or here's why you failed, isn't teaching them a lesson. It's just giving them an answer, and they're going to be less receptive of that. If you can help them understand how or why that failure occurred, they're going to be that much more invested. They're going to also have to do a lot more of that self-searching. If you're asking them questions and you don't want to start with anything big, you want to start small. So you don't want to, you're not going to sit there and say, so, hey, what went wrong? Because that's not coaching. And that's something that, it's an innocent question on its own. But then you get the employee that just kind of throws their hand up to go, I don't know. So you can't start big. You have to start small and say, or even just something, tell me about your process. So they can start to open up. Once you get them going, get them thinking, get those wheels turning, then you can start asking the bigger, meatier questions. But at the heart of it, being a coach is really just asking a lot of questions and being willing to keep asking until you found the right questions that unlock that aha moment for someone.
I really love that. Never start off that meeting by saying, so what do you think went wrong? Not a
I
safe
think
psychological safety thing.
Not at all.
do you give people a chance to fail safely? And I think that people were better players in games because they were willing to go through reps, and you let them fail first before you look to correct or to provide some type of advice that they could then adjust to. And I think that it's the same way in businesses. Whatever it is that your people need to do well, you do well what you do often, and you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You've got to give them a chance to learn by doing. And you can certainly give them some hints or ideas, but they've got to experience that thing, whether it's going through and losing a couple of sales or going through some role playing, whatever that might be. If they can fail safely, they're more willing after the house is on fire to look for water, right? And once they see, they're not going to listen because you're frustrated. They're going to listen because they get frustrated. And once they see that gap between where they see themselves and where they see that they want to be, it's the gap that opens the door to them being more receptive to those ideas that they can apply and begin to improve.
Wow. I mean, that's so powerful. Failure isn't final if we can just reframe it as feedback, right? So, very well said, very well said. Now, let's bring it home with some takeaways, all right? I got a question for both of you, all right? So, Ashira, I'll start with you. What's one thing leaders can do this week to delegate more effectively?
Oh, one thing. I would say make sure that you're always having a conversation. So go into that delegation, making it a two-way conversation, not simply you handing out an assignment.
I like it. All right, Sean, one question for you. What's one mistake to stop doing when handing off work?
One mistake to stop doing. I would actually offer that there are those four. I think that, somewhere in that list of four things that are on the template, leaders will probably find themselves, or at least a past version. And that is, have you identified the appropriate task? Is it something that is a task that is appropriate for delegation? Have you identified the right individual, and you're not throwing something blindly, but you're handing it off to somebody who is already going to be competent and desirous of growth and development? Have you helped to mandate for them what the metrics are, and to define what does success look like on this project or for what I'm looking for you to provide? And then finally, do you give them the equipment that they need, and do you give them the evaluation date so you can maintain contact and continue to provide support? And I think that when delegation goes wrong, it's one of those four areas that are generally to blame.
Well, there you have it. All right. Now, before I let both of you go, for our listeners who want more, where can they find your resources and keep learning more? Ashira, where can people find you?
So easiest, you can find me on LinkedIn or my website, which is just www.ashiraprossack.com. And just
All right.
feel free to send me an email too. Always happy to answer questions.
All right. Sean, where can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, along with Ashira, you can find me online on LinkedIn at Sean Glaze. You can also go to stickycultures.com and lists all the events and offerings that I provide for leaders and organizations. And it's been absolutely a pleasure to spend time with you today, Saul.
All right. This is great. You heard it, folks. I'm going to be having Ashira and Sean's LinkedIn as well as the websites available in the show description, so you have that handy. And with that, thank you, Ashira and Sean, for this being a guest to my podcast. It's been a masterclass in delegation. And we often think about delegation as just a productivity hack, but really it's a culture builder.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing your light. Thank you for sharing your insights on that. And to our listeners, do share this episode with someone who needs help letting go. And don't forget to subscribe and review the show. So until next time, take care. And as always, keep innovating in everything that you do. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.